Well, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you.
So,
About this.
I think you're going to do your name justice more than I will.
That's completely fair. That is.
So why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is VanArendonk Baugh, and yeah, I actually when I travel and speak, I actually have a slide to like explain how to pronounce my name. That's just a standard, and I'll give to people to introduce, or I'll just use it myself at the beginning of my presentation or whatever. Yeah.
So, what do you really enjoy about immersing yourself in another culture, and what have you specifically learned that you didn't know going into that
Oh my
experience?
gosh, I love travel, and I love research, so that's great because I get to do that and pretend it's my job. It's awesome. There's ways of perception. And that come through culturally, and I'm an American, so we have this like agro-industrial we get this agro-industrial complex. We've got these, and then we have national parks, but for the most part, like that's not we're not connected to the land, or,
right.
Whatever. But then I go to New Zealand, and there's a completely different feeling about that, and I talked to my friend who's writing in Maori mythology and how the Taniwha fit in, and that's not let me say obviously first, there's cultural appropriation, and that's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
And I'm not talking about adapting a worldview or belief system that is not yours, but being able to stop and look back and go, wow, this is a incredible living system that we tend to take for granted. Okay, but then take that and apply it to any of a million things, from personal relationships to politics to whatever, and you're going to get that exposure by going different places and reading about how different people approach things. And frequently, if you're banging your head against the same wall for 27 times, maybe come at it from a different angle and you get a different place. So
nice. Do you feel like there's you just get this feeling of like you've been there and you've like experienced something that is out of this world, something that just of lives inside of you now that you can't get rid of?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Again, going back to traveling, last year I had the opportunity to go backpacking in the Andes Mountains.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing. And we ended up at Lake Kilauea, which is a big volcanic crater, and it's about 12,000 feet or so. I mean, it's pretty high up there. You have to kind of work up to that altitude. And we just had the most amazing day. We just did a loop around it, and rainbows are popping out, and I pick up a dog, and like all kinds of crazy things were going on, and it was just one of those days like I couldn't have planned that. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And massively, cultural differences there, and it's a way of okay, I need to learn from this and be respectful from this and appreciate this while I'm in it. But I'm also bumping up against the things that I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is a real problem, and I don't think this is me as a comfortable American problem. This is a real ethical problem.
Sure.
And but I can't come in and be like, hey guys, I'm an American and I know how to fix this. Like that's not not going to work either. So just all kinds of
that's probably going to have the opposite effect.
Yeah. There's well-intentioned but stupid approaches, and
But you did find one. You decided to settle into the Eastern culture a little bit, and in your Kitsune tales, I hope I said that correctly.
Kitsune, yeah.
Kitsune tales from a Western perspective. Do you feel like you have a sense of responsibility to just be a liaison as much as a storyteller, or do you feel like liaisoning comes naturally with the storytelling?
Oh my gosh, that's an either or I hadn't considered. Let me back up a little bit. I absolutely feel a sense of responsibility when I'm doing that, because there is a tremendous amount of history and culture there that I can't just like
centuries, right?
Yeah, and thousands, millennia for we've got 5,000 years of Kitsune lore. And I can't just be like, I'm gonna pick this and put them on my wall and now they're decorative. Like that's not the way to do that. So I really, really hope that anybody reading any of my Japanese folklore stuff actually comes away educated as well as entertained. And I actually teach at a lot of conventions and even at libraries and things. I actually teach a 2-hour class on Japanese folklore, just to kind of, hey guys, these are things that you're definitely seeing references to. Like you go to the movies, Pokemon are all yokai with the serial numbers filed off. Like here's what we're actually using when you're experiencing these things. So I guess the way I come at it, I can't imagine doing it not as a kind of liaison.
Mm-hmm.
But I certainly also don't come in as like, hey, I had Google, therefore I am the expert on this, because that's not going to work out either. Yeah.
Does that make your writing process a little bit more difficult because you do feel that burden of responsibility?
Oh, I do a lot of research and a lot of second guessing and a lot of more research. Yeah.
So what tropes, when it comes to the fantastical elements of your writing, do you try to avoid at all times?
Oh, like never is a really, really big word.
Okay, maybe sometimes.
Yeah. So I feel like tropes became tropes for a reason, so there's
Right.
probably something good in there. Trope and cliche, there's a fine line. It might be a big overlap in the Venn diagram, but there is actually a difference. I don't know. Like, I don't feel like any trope is truly off limits. It's just how well you do it.
Yeah.
And
is there one in particular you like to embrace? That you've always said, this is one that I'm just going to go for it?
no. No, not that either.
Just happens naturally?
Yeah, if the story includes that, I mean, the obvious, major hero's journey one that everybody can immediately think of and call back to mind.
And that's probably because folklore is saturated in that.
Absolutely, yeah. And but on the other, it's on the one hand, it's easy to look at that and go, oh my gosh, it's so overdone and it's so poorly done so often. But the fact that it was poorly done over here doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It just means that you need to do it better.
Right.
And but on the other hand, oh my gosh, that's not the only story out there either. Like feel free to go and embrace some other things. Did you know there's a heroine's journey? Nobody talks about that. All of these sorts of things. I don't think in terms of I do this, I don't do this. It's more of what's this story doing. So.
Yeah. Sometimes when writers do that though, they think know that they don't want to be that guy that's writing the same story that somebody else wrote. Right.
Well, and that's definitely a thing. But for me, that's more of a somebody else used this plot twist and I had that. I am, and probably where part of this comes from is I am not an organized writer. Let's say that. So I have friends.
Answer to the tour.
I'm exploratory.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I like that. Is that the new buzzword?
I heard that somewhere, and I'm like, I'm taking that, man. Yeah. It sounds so much better than I'm on a roller coaster. Let's see where this goes. But I have a friend. I've got a number of friends who are excellent outliners, and one of them is a friend of mine. She's actually in my critique group. She's got this color-coded notebook. Everything is broken out. She's like, there are 4 chapters in chapter 27, or I'm sorry, 4 scenes in chapter 27 and 3 scenes in chapter 28, and this scene is going to be 460 words. And I'm like, did you sacrifice a goat? Like, what is this? How did this happen? I have no idea how you can do this. And yeah, so that's that's not me.
Yeah, I understand.
I'm the opposite of that.
No, I'm totally with you. I'm the same way. So it's like I have friends that are like to the nth degree the detail, and their outlines are more detailed than their novels sometimes. It's crazy.
Yeah. I have matured now to the point where sometimes I will approach a new project with 3, maybe 5 bullet points.
Nice.
And so yeah, it's good.
Where do you think a character usually takes shape for you in your writing process?
This character creation is this weird, like, demi-magical, I don't understand. I am not one of the people who does character interviews or sits down and works out personality typing or anything. I tend to start with a premise, and I stick a person who's kind of sort of interesting in that premise, and then I just throw bad things at them and see what they do. And my theory it's not really well developed, but in real life, you don't know who somebody is until you see their actions. Like, if I introduce myself to you, you'd be like, yeah, you just said a bunch of words. Then you wait and see what I do when the bus is late, and then I'm like, oh, that's how she reacts under pressure, or whatever. And that's how you get to know somebody. And I feel like characters are if they're going to be people, that's the same way. I can't sit down and be like, well, you like cats, and you like sprinkles on your cupcakes, and I know, I just wait and see what they do.
That wouldn't be a very interesting read.
It's also like it goes back to the exploratory. Like, I'll be writing along and somebody will do something. They'll be like, "Huh, that's interesting." Like, and I know theoretically it's coming from my own head, but I have no connection to it. So,
I totally understand that too. Was it your intention to always write in a series, or how do you approach the dispersing of information and make that fine line between the reveal and there's thoughts about the first book has to have this cliffhanger to reach the second book and things like that. And being a pantser and somebody who writes off the cuff, I imagine that's an even more daunting idea for you in that respect. So where do you cut the line when you're trying to make? Well, I'm going to say
series? First of all, I consider myself very new to writing series. The Kitsune Tales started as a single story, and then I wrote another one, and then I wrote a few more, but they were never intended to have a long-running series. I still have ideas for it, but that was never like I didn't sit down and with the idea to write a series. The only other series that I'm doing, my first one just came out in July. The second one comes out in September, and that's a series because I wrote a 500,000 word book, and that's not the way to go. Yeah. So yeah, I did have to consider very carefully where are my landings that I can break this and have a complete arc, but still lead into the next part. So I am not the person to ask about how-to series because I'm like, I don't know, let's find out. But I agree, like, I think there's two kinds of series that would affect that planning a little bit differently. There's the, I'm going to call it episodic, like the typical cozy mystery series. There might be some long-running plot elements, but everyone's complete and you can pick up book 4 or book 7 and start and you're going to be fine. And then if you have something like my epic fantasy, like don't pick up book 2. It will make absolutely no sense. You have to start at book 1 because they're not episodic. It's one long-running thing that I just put in 3 books because 500,000 words. So that's, I don't like books that just stop. And I need a plot arc. I need a landing. Otherwise, I get ragey. But that's me. So
with the 500,000 words one, then let's talk about this a little bit. So you have the 500,000 words. Did you, when you split it up, did you have to rewrite some of the second portion to kind of go along with the first portion, or did you find a nice clean split?
I found a couple of good spots. They are, I'm going to say, slightly cliffhangery because they were it wasn't intended to stop it. Like, okay, we solved this problem, but this problem is still going. But I feel like they were landing points. So that was good. And rewrites are still underway because I have to have a deadline to get something out, or I will revise it forever. I'm not good at you're done. It's not good.
But that's the beauty of self-publishing sometimes too. You can set your own timeline, right?
Yes, and revise it, and then forget it, and ignore it, and set it again. Yeah.
What's your favorite way to start a scene? Are you a dialogue person? Are you an exposition person? How do you, especially with fantasy?
Yeah. So while I'm working on my revisions for thing I'm doing right now, apparently we start all scenes by walking through doors. So that's something I noticed about myself that I'm not proud of. So we're gonna remove some doors. I like to start with something actively happening. Like, we walk through the door and say something, or we walk through the door and we see something, or we walk through the door and, I don't know, like, it's got to be a door apparently, but there's, I like exposition, but I like to drop it in just a tiny eyedropper at a time.
Nice.
Which,
not an info dump.
No, which I actually just taught a class on yesterday here, but what I was joking about, the reason I'm capable of explaining this now is the series that I'm doing. I started, it's a second world fantasy, but not being content with that, it's a second world fantasy which has its own world building and then a portal into a third world with its own world building. So good job, Laura. And that means I have so much exposition. Yeah. And so I feel like after manhandling that into shape, I like, okay, I have learned some cheats. Here they are. So yeah.
Nice. Do you feel like running a successful business, you ran an animal behavior business, or you still do, factor in your decision to self-publish because you felt like you had the confidence to run a business?
Absolutely, 100%. Self-publishing I view as a business. I make business decisions about it, and so having some entrepreneur background was so helpful, and I think more people should do that. I think I talk to a lot of self-pubbers, and they're like, well, I feel like this, or I feel like that. I'm like, no, this is a business. Like, and if you want to run it if you want to do it as a hobby, that's totally your call.
Right.
But if you are trying to run it as a business, find some entrepreneur resources, find some entrepreneurs, and absolutely treat it as a business.
Yeah, I agree totally. Do you feel that's the thing that's missing from most people's thought process when they try to self-publish, or is there something else that you think?
How much time do we have? I have a lot of opinions. I think a lot of people, the shift from interest to hobby to business is not clear, and, and it needs to, and the other part of that, and I think this is actually something that I've watched develop over the last, I'm going to say 5 or so years in the self-publishing world. Don't get me wrong, I love the easy accessibility of self-publishing, like absolutely 100% for it, but there's so much cultural pressure in there to get in and publish, and I'm in groups, writing groups online, where I see people and they're like, I'm halfway through my first story. How do I handle formatting and all? And I'm like, no, you don't have a product.
Right.
Like, and when you finish your first story, you still don't have a product.
Right.
And it's really hard because it sounds so elitist and negative, but I'm a huge believer in Ray Bradbury's million words. Like, your first million words don't count. Like, this is a craft. You can't just sit down and magically be good at it. And for every person who had that overnight bestseller, they had 10 years of practice before that. And so that's probably what I would say is the biggest misconception that I see most often now is, okay, I decided to write a book. So, and true story, I have a quote, I actually have a talk on self-publishing, and I pulled like quotes and obscured them from things people have actually said to me. And one of them was, my first book has been out for 3 days and nobody's bought it. How am I supposed to make a living off of this? And I'm
wow.
Did your business plan include a bank robbery? Because that's not how any of this works. Like 3 days, you can't be living off your writing.
The tons of misconceptions out there are just amazing.
Yeah, and it's really sad and frustrating because this is such a phenomenal opportunity that we have, and I love it. And I'm technically a hybrid author.
Yeah.
But I do all my long form work, self-publishing, and it's so great, and it's so frustrating to see people shoot themselves in the foot or cut themselves out or be frustrated or discouraged where there's no need to be.
Right.
And so there's good info out there. Go get that.
Absolutely, I totally agree. One of the questions that I get often from young writers too is because I'll mention that I've thrown away probably more words than you've written.
Oh yeah.
And they'll go, really? How do you even let go of something like that? And it's like you said, you just have to be seasoned enough to know that this isn't working.
Well, and the other part of that is if I have written enough words, when I have, it's the economics theory of scarcity.
Right.
Like, if I have written 3 stories, they are my precious 3 stories. And if I've written 100 stories, I can be like, okay, you know what? You're my least favorite child.
Yeah.
Like, go sit in the corner, right? Like, and I don't actually have to set it on fire and ceremonially dance around the ashes, right? I just have to say, this is not the one I'm going to send out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What does every one of your stories have to have?
Someone will discover empowerment or enfranchisement that they didn't think was available to them.
That's outstanding. Nice. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, what do you love about being indie?
Oh my gosh, I'm flexible. And I've got, for all the jokes I made about deadlines, I can set my own timeline.
Right.
So an example would be a couple of years ago, Norse started having a moment, right? Like, Thor Ragnarok and Neil Gaiman's book came out, and like all the massive things were happening at the same time. And I had been writing a Norse mythology themed book, which really should have started years ago and jumped on that, but I was looked up and I was like, oh my gosh, there's the bandwagon, and I could turn around and get that book out.
Nice.
And not look at it where traditionally that would have been 2 years gone by the time it got out, even on a really good timeline. But indie, I can be like, okay, let's go.